morning, students. I'm Lauren Davis.
And I'm Michele Baber.
And this is Bravo Breakdowns, your podcast study guide for reality TV. So we have a very special guest here today who is maybe like one of the most accomplished people I've ever spoken to in real life. Not to build it up too much, but like we joke about this podcast being a college course for reality TV. Like she could literally teach a PhD class about reality TV, and a lot of the class would be just about herself. We've discussed her contributions as the former VP of NBCUniversal. She was instrumental in the creation, development, and success of the Housewives franchise and the Bravo network as we know it today. She has a fabulous Substack called the LZ Sunday Paper. She has a new book out, available on Amazon, called Letters from the Corporation of Brown University. We could continue to list her accomplishments for the entire recording, but we only have an hour with her. Please welcome Lauren Zalaznick. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Lauren.
Hey, round of applause for everybody. Thank you so much for that unbelievably kind and semi-inflated introduction.
Not inflated at all. Seriously, as we were researching you, me and Michele would text stuff back and forth like, oh my God, it just never ends. Now she's on the Nielsen committee. Oh my God, she's working with RuPaul. We're like, how did you do it all?
How did you do it all?
I'm real old, so I've just been doing it for a long time. That's all it is. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, part of it, you started so young, right? Like you were like one of the youngest heads of programming, like when you took over VH1. What brought you into like production and development? Did you always love TV?
Well, this is actually good for your youths who are considering this kind of an education, because the focus is so strong on pre-professionalism, and you have to have a degree in marketing, and you have to go to film or TV grad school, etc. And it's good to know, do have evidence that this is not just a then thing. I do have evidence that if you figure out kind of where you want to start and you gravitate towards things that you're pretty good at, but also love, you're more likely to be successful, even if it's a more haphazard path. So the punchline is, I didn't have quote unquote real job with a paycheck or health insurance or paid vacation till my early 30s. And yeah. So the first decade or so post college was today we would probably call it entrepreneurship. Then we called it freelancing and scraping by and, doing gigs. And those gigs happened to be independent films, which was my first love. And those were films like Todd Haynes's Poison and Larry Clark's Kids and Jim McKay's Girls Town and Tom Kellen's Swoon. And to supplement that lack of income, which many can relate to, we were winning awards but not making a ton of money. We made commercials. And back in the day when they were sort of newly invented music videos, all of that and all of those amazing people and all of our great little companies led me to be asked not to be in programming and development, but to be the head of something called on-air promotion, a big piece of marketing at VH1. So it was from marketing, and my first real, before it was probably invented, rebranding of a kind of subpar channel, VH1, which at the time was called Video Hits 1, in these crazy Art Deco, these letters. That's how it happened. I just said yes to something that seemed to be a challenge and something that I was going to be interested in and possibly good at. I was so inexperienced that I thought it was like a 1-year rebrand commitment. It actually was a real job. And that job lasted 2 years. And 2 years into it, I was asked to move from marketing to programming at VH1. And that set me off on my TV course.
Wow. The children have forgotten that VH1 stands for Video Hits 1.
Video Hits dash 1. It still drives me crazy when they include the dash in VH1, because it was like a mission to stamp out the dash. And still, it gets listed sometimes with the dash. And me and my whole team from a million years ago text each other and say, they got it wrong.
Yeah. The work of punctuation and marketing is never
Yes,
done.
never
Yeah.
done.
So,
Mhm.
while you were at VH1, you had a notable like collaboration or meeting of the minds, I guess, with like Fenton and Bailey from World of Wonder, and you put the RuPaul show on the air.
My God.
Did your collaboration with them, like, did that kind of create a shared vision for what the landscape of reality TV could be today?
That is a very interesting question. Fenton Bailey and Randy Barbado of World of Wonder are truly geniuses and creators and marketers in their own right. Were New York City East Village kids who had a vision for this. Back in the day, we called Rue a drag queen.
Mhm.
Rue was a multifaceted, incredibly smart, driven performer.
Mhm.
It was not happenstance, and everything that he's accomplished, it's a mission. It is not
Mm-hmm.
luck, happenstance, or anything else. It's all been a path. At VH1, honestly, reality TV part, I think, was created more around a bunch of shows I did have to do with, the 100 Greatest Franchise, chief among them, and a show I had a little to do with, which was the bio doc series called Behind the Music.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
But what the RuPaul show did, which greatly impacted my reality television career, was establish the notion of authenticity, overused word today.
Mm-hmm.
A character who people said, oh, they're just doing it for the cameras. Oh, this is a performance. Oh, this is something where I knew opposite was true. This was a person, a human being, a character in real life who was just waiting for media to catch up with them.
Mhm.
And so in that way, that was a very different format. It was a produced show. It was modeled on the Cher show, very, signposted all over the place that that's what we were doing. But yeah, that was innovative, nothing like it on TV, and probably the first performer like that who was given, 5 hours a week to strut their stuff.
Wow. Amazing. That's what like RuPaul always says on like the show to this day. Like where he's like, if you told me, 20 years ago that I was gonna be a star and like take drag to the mainstream all based on like my force of personality and marketing genius, I would be like, yep, I know
Yep.
that's gonna happen.
Yeah. Exactly
Yeah.
right. It's not like this fake humble pie, and it's not braggy either. It's truly like this was a mission and a vision, and it was just a matter of the people who were lucky enough to be around him
Mhm.
to get on board and see the North Star, which is, very much how we built, I guess you would call it, the Bravo brand, including a number of the titles that God invented them, all of which are still going strong, which says a lot in this, super
Right.
fragmented world.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that. So when you become VP of programming at NBC Universal, you like make the radical decision to like Bravo up till then, like, I mean, we're old enough to remember it was like Lois Boonwell
Yeah, and
retrospectives
like
and like,
the Actors Studio and
Yes.
right,
yeah.
Yes.
right. And you radically decide to shape like the whole new programming slate around the new hit Queer Eye.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How was it received to take a leap of faith like that?
Well, for your course curriculum,
Mhm.
if they want a little sidebar into the business school curriculum, what really happened was that after VH1, I thought I was going back into film. The last thing I delivered for VH1 and the MTV networks was a feature film, my first love, and that happened to be the film Zoolander,
Oh,
which,
wow.
yeah,
Wow.
yes, which was based off of original IP created for the thing called the VH1 Vogue Fashion Awards. And Zoolander was a little character, an interstitial character who came back year after year in sketch after sketch. And years later, Ben Stiller and a great writer named Drake Sather came and said, we have an idea for a movie. The movie got made. I was like, I took this detour into TV. I'm going back to movies. And my last day at VH1 was August 31st, 2001. And I took a few days off with my 2 little kids, pregnant with my 3rd kid. And 11 days later was 9/11. So number one, Zoolander came out 2 Thursdays after that. And, little known, little told story, was a flop because no one was going to the movies. Comedy was dead. All the late night shows were off the air. No way to promote it. And my financing for my 2 little movies that I was going back to fell apart. Anyway, I was offered a job and I took that job, and it was as president of the non-existent network called Trio, owned by Barry Diller and Universal Television. And a couple of years into that gig, where we made a lot of noise in the press, we won awards. I won my first Peabody for a show at Trio. We were acquired by NBC. And that is the acquisition in 2004 that created this. Again, this is your MBA school case.
We love it.
That created NBCUniversal. What is also kind of weird is that only about a year before, NBC had already acquired Bravo. They had it. It was not part of this acquisition. And we joined up this cable network, and they're like, well, you're the president of this little kind of arts network over there. We don't love it that much, and we're probably going to shut it down. Sorry. But you can maybe be president of this other arts network that we acquired called Bravo. And why don't you go figure that out while we have this giant new company and figure out the whole thing? So Queer Eye had just launched. Queer Eye was not, quote unquote, my show, but the brilliant and talented people like Amy Introcaso Davis and Frances Barrett, who did launch that show, were there as the head of development and the head of programming. And when I got there with my little band of cuckoos from Trio, I had a head of marketing named Jason Klarman. I had a head of programming named Andy Cohen. I had, and it was a tiny little band of people who had made a nothing network into front page of the Wall Street Journal, front cover of Entertainment Weekly. We were the little engine that could. We had Queer Eye. We loved Queer Eye. We had Bravo. We assessed Bravo. And it was a turning point. It was a brand turning point, which is why I mentioned my head of marketing, Jason, where we were risking turning off this small but devoted audience who loved arts, who loved opera, who loved ballet, who loved James Lipton, and who loved Queer Eye times a million, because if we had 1 viewer for an opera, we had 1 million viewers for Queer Eye. So what could we do to migrate them to other shows like that? And that was how we approached development with the hit called Queer Eye already on the air.
Lauren Z.
Yes.
I'm the only Lauren not here. Regarding Queer Eye, I think that's really how I first remembered Bravo, because it was such a massive this show. I had never seen programming like that before. I don't really know if there was programming like Queer Eye when it was introduced on Bravo. What was it like at the time when you realized what a cultural phenomenon that show had become, and that it really was going to change the entire brand of Bravo? What was it like, and what was the talent like? Just curious.
Well, number one, the talent was phenomenal. The original Fab Five were truly themselves, authentic. You see Run Into Carson, you can see Ted on Chopped. You can just Tom. You can still see that they are who they are. And that was a continuity lesson around this concept that hadn't yet been named, authenticity, but with even more of an edge because it was produced into a very mainstream show with the power of two people. And they happen to both be named Jeff Gaspin, who launched it, and Jeff Zucker, who was the big boss of it. And we kind of learned that you can take something that would have been deemed super, super, super niche, and you can put some mainstream power behind it and get, I mean, an enormous, that this is like ancient history, but when there were broadcast networks and there were cable networks, we were looking at, a few 100,000 viewers in prime time per night. And, on network television, it was still in the, 10 to 20 million people coming off the 90s. This is coming right out of the 90s. Friends, ER, enormous hits on NBC. So anyway, we learned that you can be authentic, you can stick to your audience, and if you can get any kind of push that made it accessible to just a few more people, not 20 million people. We didn't need 20 million people, but we needed, maybe a 10th to a 20th of their audience. And that made Bravo 10 times as big as it had been. So that was kind of the business lesson for that, the audience lesson.
That's so interesting that, it wasn't like a pivot to like, well, who cares about people who like behind the actor studio? Now we want like a more mainstream audience. It was like, because I was someone who I like behind the actor studio, and then I loved Real Housewives. Like, it makes sense. It would be a 1-to-1.
Yeah, it was a matter of identifying the core of types of viewers who were loyal to Bravo and kind of more expanding that core. And if we lost some people, we were concentrating on keeping and pleasing most of the old Bravo core viewers. And by the way, it was a small network. So it was a small core. It wasn't like a brand shift, like, I don't know, sneaker company that starts to make, high heels. It was not a pivot in that way. It was simultaneously intense, narrow focus on just a few people that we needed to get a Nielsen rating. Intense focus and narrowing a vision that we had faith would actually yield expansion and multiplying those people. So that's how we approached, we have Queer Eye. What else should we do?
Yeah. So the concept that you talk about of the Bravo wink, which I guess is like essentially like kind of a self-awareness, a meta-ness, a campiness. Did that evolve out of like what you thought that the former audience like would still appreciate in such a different kind of programming, like reality TV, docu-soaps, that type of thing, but still retaining that?
It's a great question. And I would say in retrospect, yes, absolutely. If you think about an opera lover, there's 5% who are enjoying it on a hyper drama, hyper camp, hyper obsessive quality, and 95% of Lincoln Center or whatever your arts center is in your city or town, they're enjoying classical music that's been done for a couple hundred, it's like, really acknowledging that there's different ways to enjoy stuff. We focused on, also it was an incremental journey. We took several years to roll out the shows that you think of as classic Bravo. They're all still on the air, by the way. And the show that came after Queer Eye was Project Runway. And so that was a different kind of invention. And that really did, it seems ridiculous to say, that really did change the face of competitive reality. Because up until that point, it was really like one kind of competition show, and that was the supreme model of CBS's Survivor, which premiered in 2000. Runway, which premiered in 2004, was kind of the first one that had, I would say, not, first of all, it was a niche subject that no one thought would work. Like, how boring could it possibly be to watch people sew
Make
dresses?
clothes, yeah.
I mean, what? And if you talk about expanding the core, people who we think, oh, everyone cares about fashion, everyone cares about this, that is the least TV audience you can possibly go for. So that was another sort of break the mold. Hey, we're casting real people. Tim Gunn was a real guy at a real school, mentoring real students. He was not cast to be on camera originally. And again, Bravo's success in our mind were characters who you literally could not make up, could not script.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Heidi Klum, Nina Garcia, the way they delivered their lines, pre-meme. Can you imagine launching
Michael
these
Kors.
shows? Michael Kors. Can you imagine launching these shows in meme culture now? I mean,
Oh my God.
it'll be,
Get the make it work of it all, right?
Yeah.
my God, one day you're in, the next day you're out. I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
please.
I wasn't somebody that was very into fashion really kind of ever, but I watched that show obsessively. I
Same.
remember so clearly, like Christian
Siriano.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
remember
Yeah.
his season and just being like blown away constantly by him. And I was like, he's gonna win, he's gonna win. And also being like, I don't know anything about fashion.
That's
But
right.
all of the characters are just, the hosts and Tim Gunn, and then, the designers that they would find, and just, kind of this like, I can't, what's the word I'm looking for? But they're just like in this space trying to create this stuff, and like this really kind of feels like high pressured situation, and the way that the designers would interact with each other, then interact with like the judges. And I learned what a separate meant. If you're making a dress versus a separate.
Yes.
I was looking into a world that I really never knew. I knew it existed, but I didn't know how it all really worked. And it was just the people that were all together making this show happen. I just remember just being like so glued to my TV whenever it was on. It wasn't just like girls that would watch it, or my gay friends that would watch it. I mean, I would have like my boyfriend in college, like he watched it too. Like it was just a universally, I feel like, liked show, because it was a window into something we hadn't really seen before,
Exactly. And so it elevated this thing that everyone should be able to relate to, which is, what am I going to wear today?
Mm-hmm.
A creative culture where, as you say, you learned a new vocabulary word. We were blown away. People using, the word, cutting it on the bias, or selvage, or draping.
Mm-hmm.
And then that also, by the way, credit, not only to our genius development and programming team, but to Dan Cutforth and Jane Lipsitz of Magical Elves at the time, Alfred Street now, who were the showrunners before they were called showrunners. They were the producers of this show. And to put together that season one of Top Chef, which was its follow-on creative competition show, took just a ton of innovation and faith that, if you thought sewing was boring, how about
Watching
pitching a
people
show? Well, not only watching people cook, but we got a lot of pushback from people who said, yeah, at least I can see the dresses and they're talking about them, but I, the viewer, cannot taste the food.
or smell the food. Yeah.
I can't smell it. Like, how am I going to believe people talking about food? And we were like, well, I mean, people read restaurant reviews and they kind of don't
Right.
lick the newspaper and, go. But still, it was tough. And the words to describe it, we didn't want to get into, wine category of words that were totally unrelatable. But it turned out that the vocabulary of chefdom,
Mm-hmm.
most geniusly articulated by Tom Colicchio,
Yeah.
and Gail Simmons, with Padma, were, it turns out, very relatable. And if they weren't relatable, they were said so often and in relation to things you could see. And the reactions of the contestants were like, yeah, my souffle, didn't, all of the things fell, and so those were two examples of non-docusoap reality shows after Queer Eye, which was a formatted, closed-ended, you could watch 1, you could watch 10, etc. Different formats, different ideas, but the similarities were, hadn't seen anything quite like that. Tailored for a very smart, literally educated, relatively affluent audience who would focus and lean in and be engaged with their television, which is kind of the opposite of what people think about reality TV. But our research, our data always said that we found these ways of kind of categorizing brain on, so to speak, versus brain off television. And no matter what the show and no matter what critics wanted to say, like end of Western civilization kind of really nice commentary, blah, blah, boo, 2 thumbs down.
Yeah.
We knew that the smartest, most engaged viewers on television were watching our stuff.
And we still are.
Yes, you still are.
We still are. I still watch Top Chef obsessively. It's still one of my favorite shows of all time. It's honestly the show that got me into food. Like, I love to cook, and that was the show that really made me love to cook. Before that, I had watched stuff on the Food Network, which was great, but I had never seen what it was like to be an up and coming chef in the United States. I loved how every season was in a different city or a different part of the country, and you learned a lot about the local food scene in that place. And it would honestly be my husband and I have gone on trips where we were like, this contestant from Chicago Top Chef owns this restaurant, and we would go to those different restaurants. I will say the early seasons of Top Chef were some of my favorite people to ever watch on TV.
Katie Joel.
Marcel.
Oh, I love Marcel.
I mean,
his phones.
Of course.
His
Marcel,
raps, he would rap. I mean, he was so good.
The lychee nut scandal, that's where these actual in real life reality situations happen. And if you get any 12 people together, there's going to be heroes, there's going to be villains, there's going to be inexplicable comments, thoughts, behaviors, actions. And when it was surrounded by, creativity and ticking clock and a really tough taskmaster, or, kind of, that is what made these characters and these seasons so memorable, even when you were rooting for, the person who you really thought deserved to win on the competency at the end of the competition.
Right.
Yeah, I remember watching, it was the first Top Chef All-Stars, and Richard won. He should have probably won this original season he was on in Chicago. And when he won, I remember him winning, and he was crying, telling his wife that he had won. And I remember crying. He's like, I willed this.
Yes. It
was it was so moving, because it was I remember him from these seasons before, and now he's come back, and it's this, everyone loves a redemption story, right? And that's what that show gave us. But it was never handed to him. You always saw how hard he worked at that. And Lauren's why are we still talking about Top
Chef?
About Top Chef, right?
Yeah.
It's not what we typically talk about on this show. We don't typically talk about Top Chef, but
kudos to Richard Blais. And he, it works in the positive and the negative. And the phrase is, he literally got what he deserved. So that was a win. Yep.
So speaking of great characters we love who tend to get what they deserve, let's talk about.
Are we talking about Tamra?
Housewives?
Yes.
Not specifically yet. So, so when Scott Dunlop first brought his pitch to you about a show about Coto de Casa, did you immediately see this as where this could fit into your new style of programming, or did it take a while for you to find the
Figure out where Coto
seeds
de Casa is.
where it fits in at all behind the gates?
The lame answer is both.
Mm-hmm.
It fit in a broad bucket when we started our development vision, kind of our North Star for future shows after Queer Eye. This is so easy to talk about because of the Queer Eye reboot, so now everyone knows. But like 3 years ago, it was like ancient history and no one remembered. The original Fab Five were experts in 5 areas: food, fashion, design, pop culture. And what we did kind of cover each of those. Easy to assign: Runway into fashion, Top Chef into food, a show like Blowout with our hero villain Jonathan Antin into beauty. We had Jeff Lewis for our design bucket.
And Tabitha, was it Tabitha Takes Over?
Tabitha's Salon Takeover.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, she's still a Bravo hero.
She's an icon. Yeah.
I mean, literally an icon. And so we had those 4 buckets, lots and lots of shows.
Mm-hmm.
Food, fashion, design, beauty. Pop culture was broader. A lot of people read pop culture in different ways. And one of the things that was a through line in food, fashion, beauty, and design was that Bravo shows tended to be about workplaces. And they were like the flip side of office comedies, but a lot of the action revolved around the office, whatever that was. When, first of all, the Coto de Casa show and Scott Dunlap came to us, and it was called Behind the Gates. That was its working title. When we so we broadly thought that it fit the pop culture bucket. It was not really a TV show. It was a casting reel, and there were like a couple of 100 characters on this casting reel. And again, the brilliant development and production team at Bravo, Sherry Levine, Amy Introcaso Davis, Andy Cohen, Francis Barrett, we met on it and met on it and met on it and started to focus in, first of all, on women. And then secondarily, women who knew each other, who had the relationships entirely. And we pared it down and pared it down. And that's how we started with our 7 women of Orange County. And so where your audience might be saying that's such BS, this had nothing to do with work, nothing to do with anything. The franchise started not as a franchise. The franchise show started as a 6-episode little series about 7 women. And it was entirely centered around their work. As Vicki was a mortgage broker, Lori, Prince and the Pauper story, was her assistant. Jenna was a real estate broker. It was revolving around this irony, which is now lost, of why we called the show what we called it. They were neither real, because they were from Southern California. It was pre-Botox, but it was certainly post, implants and, a lot of puffing up, etc. And so we meant not so real in that way. And we literally were being ironic, now lost, on the word housewife. And that was born of the ABC network show called The Desperate Housewives and the other network show called The OC.
Right.
And it was like an ironic mashup with 7 great characters who all knew each other, with a nod to the real world, which started with great characters in the show open. Everyone knew each other, who lived in the same house.
Like getting real.
So when it starts getting real. So we really modeled ourselves after that history with a little bit of a Bravo twist. And that's how it started.
Was any of it like Choosing the Kios? Was it inspired at all by like the first docu?
Who was Terry Hatcher?
Family.
Oh God. We were not thinking about anyone who is well known or not. It was a negative. to us if you had been on another show before. It was a negative in the competitive reality. Like, we put them on the pile of like, way maybe. We did not want
less authentic, or like
yeah, like
machine.
people who looked at it as like a serial set of jobs. Like this was going to be, you know, like real. So if anything, that was a negative, and they had to work to prove that this was going to be, you know, really transparent and on the up and up.
Do you think that like now, in terms of like people kind of being more aware of like, you know, breaking the fourth wall, understanding it is a job, do you think now Bravo is more open in casting to like people who are gonna, obviously, like there's a lot of soap actresses, people who will clock in and deliver?
You know, I don't know, because I've been out for a number of years. What I would say is that it's not a conscious decision to go one way or another. The reality of the reality is that season 1 of anything is magical. Nobody has seen it. The chefs have not seen it. The designers have not seen it. Like, they don't know how to act. As soon as you air season 1 of anything, it changes forever. So if you're in season 20, literally season 20,
it's crazy.
You know, you gotta give it a break. Like, you gotta say like, hey, this show is what it has evolved into. And I, you know, amazingly do not watch a lot of reality TV. I don't watch a lot of TV for whatever reason. Anyway, so what I would say I see when I see it, I see the roots so clearly. I see it's hard for people to believe that when the camera's on and you have this lens in your face, it's impossible for people to believe that after a few minutes, let alone a few hours, days, weeks, you don't see it anymore. And I always thought during COVID, when time after time after time, people on a Zoom call, just like ours right now, would do things that got them in either a lot of embarrassment, like picking their nose, or a lot of trouble, like some other things. And that to me was proof to the millions and millions of people who said like, oh, you know, they know the cameras are on them. What? You know, you're on a Zoom call. Why in the world? So anyway, 20 seasons later, I give Bravo full credit for keeping a brand, a show alive. And if you want to know where I really think it's brilliant, and Andy and I talked about this explicitly in the development of the Housewives franchise after a couple of seasons, we viewed it as a cross between an 80s scripted nighttime soap and literal 5-day a week broadcast daytime soap. And the shows that we loved, we had already been watching for 20, 30 years, chief among them all my children. And everyone was 20, 30 years older, or they had been killed and somehow came back, or their evil twin sister was somehow like not there anymore and never referred to, or there. And so when you think about the history of the genre of soap, that's why I think everyone's going to laugh and like me, but like that's where I think the integrity of the structure and genre of the show holds up beautifully.
Right. Yeah, because essentially, I mean, that's like what so many other reality TV legacies are modeled after. Like, The Challenge has been running 20 years, and that's a soap. Like, you know,
yes,
it's that having that template, because so much of this you guys were, I feel like, kind of like creating out of thin air. Like, you know, that you pushed for like keeping the Orange County in the title because you were like, I can see it being a franchise.
Oh no, that's the opposite. That's the opposite of true. That's the opposite of true.
That's what it says in the
well, it's true.
Not to call them out.
Well, that book is 100% great and accurate. The thing about the franchise prediction, and the reason it's the opposite of true, is that when we did the first 6 episodes of Orange County, it hit a couple of challenges in the cutting room, in the editing room, and it just didn't feel like a show. And we figured out how to kind of make it into a show. And we thought, season 2 of the OC is not to be. We are lucky that we got 6 decent episodes. And so let's put the name of the place on it so that we can go cast in another city, because the OC isn't going to last. So if we have any shot of this at all, it's going to be to find a different cast in a different city and see if we can eke out 6 episodes there.
Ooh.
So, yeah. And so we started casting before OC had aired in New Jersey and Atlanta. And we thought we were only going to do 1. And then we put OC on the air. And it wasn't a smash hit out of the box, but it was pretty good. We were analog schedulers then, and our genius scheduler, Jerry Leo, was and still is to this day 1,000 times better than your Netflix algorithm. This is what the algorithm is. If you like that, you will like that. If this is the biggest show on my air, I'm going to put the new show behind it, because the most people will be. So anyway, that's the IRL algorithm thinking.
Right.
So,
it seems like Bravo still does that, like with
oh, they sure do.
Mhm.
the Valley and VPR.
Yes.
I will watch all of this.
Yes,
And I do.
right. And so the OC premiered well. It grew and it grew and it grew. And we very quickly hurried up and put together a 7th episode of that first season. And so then we were in this position where we had already cast and begun to shoot in
Jersey.
And I greenlighted a 2nd season of the OC. And for years and years, we kept 2 franchises, 2 cities off the air at the same time. It was only one after another after another. And that was sort of for the brand preservation of Bravo, so that it was still many, many, many different shows, not just one. And slowly but surely, if you're in 12, 14 cities, yeah, it did take over the air. And so when I say, no, that's not true about the franchise, it just wasn't envisioned as a
Conglomerate.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Maybe it would move around, but it was a modest show, and certainly not, what we thought the network would be built on at that time.
Got it. Dave Quinn, that's on me. The context was kind of open-ended, and I inferred that. So my bad. Rescind
I
that.
always thought that's why it was.
No, it was because we wanted it to be one and done, and then we could name the next one, so people would know it was different if they didn't like the first one.
Wow.
And when did you realize Vicki Gunvalson was going to be such a star?
Was the housewife, as you call her. We agree.
OC of the OG.
1 second after I saw her, that's when.
Wow.
That was a me thing. I connected with Vicki's ethos, character, star power, and again, she was a person for whom the cameras were just late. It wasn't her being different in front of them. They were just late and didn't get turned on until we were there.
She just she'd never. Lauren and I talk about how the best people on reality TV are
we compare them to opera divas.
They don't even know that there's a camera on.
And they hit a volume and height of emotions, like a grand boudinal.
And the little family van of it all, and the showing up to her son's fraternity and unannounced. I mean, she's a star.
I think
that X Factor.
Guess what? I think that I now use his line, I think, with credit usually, and I will again now. I feel like it was Reza, the star of season 1 of Shahs of Sunset, who in a, what we would call an OTF interview, direct to camera recap during the episode interview, literally said, like, in answer to someone who was, provoking him to say, are you like this only in front of the camera? I think it was really him who said, honey, I have been like this since I was born, and the cameras are just catching up to me. And, that was also a long time ago, pre-mobile, pre-social, not memeing yet, and that was, I truly believe, the God's honest truth for him.
Do you, like, taking it back to the beginning of your career, this is kind of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but kind of what you saw in RuPaul, right? Like this type of, they've always been this person. We're just now starting to record.
Yeah.
Yes. There's no question that that was what came through. I would say the most successful creative endeavors, certainly in nonfiction and reality, including documentary format, is, despite the evolution and the copycats and, what people think, the best and most popular versions for what I had contact with and I had agency and oversight over were the realist reality that we got. That's how the shoots happen, that's how the footage happened. And people get confused between what producing is and what manipulation is, and I'm sure there's about a billion examples of very negative kinds of reality TV. But in my experience, the iconic ones, the groundbreaking ones, the first ever quote unquote ones were true in their intent and hopefully their execution.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So people, a lot, like we've talked about, like what makes a person like really pop and be great on reality TV. There are like detractors of reality TV who say that like the networks only measure how good the seasons are by ratings rather than by like how like critically successful the season was, even though it was like reality TV was unfairly dismissed for a long time, and now it's finally getting awards. Emmys. So is that true in your experience, or did you guys like be like, wow, like even if the ratings were low, this was like a great season of TV, and we feel good about that?
We ran a business, and we had really tough goals, and we had really tough growth goals. And in the good old days, we got paid through advertisers, and advertisers pay on ratings. At the same time, we were producing enough so that what we termed, basically, the phrase is always used, it was a modest hit. It meant when it was a modest hit, we kind of had like a mental tote board, and there were ratings first and foremost. There were awards, accolades, great reviews. Those were really important to us. Super duper important. Top Chef was not our biggest show. It was huge, but it was not our absolute biggest show. And when it got the first ever Primetime Emmy Award nomination for a cable show in its category, that was a breakthrough. That was incredible. And then, of course, it won and broke this amazing race streak once. So there was ratings, there was recognition, there was press, and just the sheer amount of press. What you would call unpaid media. You didn't spend a nickel to get the Bravo brand out there. So if it hit on all three categories, it was a home run. It was a giant hit. If it hit on two of the three, even not the ratings two, it was deemed okay for a long time, multi-seasons. 1 out of 3, that was where it got tough. You're running a business and you had to say goodbye to, an award winner that nobody watched and nobody wrote about, or whatever the one category was.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
you can put that back. You can put that back in the MBA syllabus.
It's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
I know we're like running out of time, but I'm nerding out. I just have so much to ask still. So, we loved your TED talk on the various like eras of television, like things that
Thank
had
you.
success. It was
Yep.
so good. It was like reflecting on like why programming was successful at the time, and that it makes somewhat easier to predict what type of shows people are looking for based on what's happening in the cultural climate. So, what do you think viewers are looking for now based on, our current American climate of uncertainty? Do you think it's escapism or
Yeah.
yeah?
It's a great question. If I could do one thing, um, you know, 10, 15 years later, that look back of the quote unquote history of television, which I called the conscience of television,
Mhm.
was the broadcast era from the late 50s to the year 2000 when Survivor premiered. If I could look at the past 25 years and do the same kind of deep years long research we did for that TED talk, that's what I would do right now. What I think is that it is a weird time. This might be old news, but it is a very different landscape. A hit show on a network is a couple of million viewers. That was
Right.
our biggest hit, is their biggest hit. The amount of content, there's probably too much and it's so niche. But what I would say is this is a very black and white time. There's not a lot of time for nuance. There's not a lot of patience for debate, as we know, etc. I would say least popular form right now is anything that is truly satirical. It just bombs. It just
Mhm.
absolutely is not appreciated. No one gets it. I think out of that kind of forest fire will come a show that achieves that somehow. And it could take the form of Laugh-In from a million years ago, or SNL from almost a million years ago, or maybe 30 Rock from half a million years ago, but something like that will come in. I think we've seen a ton of earnestness, like the Ted Lasso minute.
Mhm.
I think we've seen the, oh, this is really real, like The Bear, like, okay,
Mhm.
yes, what was really real? Top Chef. But anyway, like,
Yeah, the
I
bear
know.
wishes. Like,
The bear wishes.
right. But I think that there will come a wave of programming that's a little more oblique and maybe for even less people, slightly headier, but it's going to be funny and it's going to be big, compelling, awesome. And, I get the whole crime thing. That may be a little bit saturated, but we'll see.
I love that. I'm excited for that when it happens. And you've done enough research and development that I trust your predictions.
We
So
call it
Let's see if it
R&D,
happens.
Lauren.
Yeah.
R&D.
Yeah.
so I just want to ask you one more quick question
I have a
about the
question.
future of. Okay.
Okay, well, I'm going to let Lauren do hers after me because mine is very lowbrow and hers is going to be highbrow. And we have to have the low with the high. Cannot believe I'm going to ask this question. But Lauren, if you could put in our other Lauren, important Lauren, above the line, Lauren, we call people, you're above the line, Lauren.
Indeed. Yep.
You're above the line. You would be number one on the call sheet.
She's seen
Well,
the call sheet. She knows.
guess what? Talent is number one on the call sheet. So
You,
after them, maybe. Yeah.
Today,
right now, you're on
talent,
number one on the
baby.
call sheet. Lauren and I are just
Thank you.
we're PAs today.
Thank you. Service. Maybe the craft service. Yeah.
Yeah.
For
Oh, we
call
should be
service.
so lucky. We
Oh
love
my
snacks.
gosh. If you could put an artifact from Housewives into
Ooh.
the Smithsonian and get rid of Archie Bunker's chair, what would you put?
I would put the car that came to pick up Vicki Gunvalson
Yes.
season
The little
1,
family van.
the family van
That's so
narrative.
good. Yes.
That should go to the Smithsonian.
Such an important piece of history. We were talking about it's like Bradley Cooper in the van and A Star is Born because
No
Mhm.
question about
yes,
it. Yep.
so
No
important.
question about it. Yep.
Mhm.
Love it.
Thank you.
So yeah, just another
By the way,
question about.
that's not lowbrow. It's
Oh,
like
that's highbrow.
that's
Smithsonian.
why enemy of all is actually middlebrow, and anything considered low or highbrow is where I live. So it's hard to live in both those places, but we jump over middlebrow and run towards either other direction.
That's 100%, yeah, what we're all about. Guilty middle brow should be the guilty pleasure because you're watching
That's
something
exactly right.
meh.
Yep, that's
Highbrow,
right.
lowbrow,
Not,
that's
no,
high art.
High art.
So, yeah, just a quick question. What do you see for the future of reality TV with, like, you were talking about how viewers want things that are a lot more black and white, and so there's a lot more, like, criticism of performers and outrage, and there's also been talk of unionizing.
Mm.
Do you, like, see any of that happening, and what do you think would be ideal to happen? Sorry, I know I'm keeping you a little long. I have to
well,
go.
I would say I would focus on the genre and the ethos and the content. I think that every subgenre of reality is ripe to be reinvented. People say, oh, food reality is over. Well, it's actually not. People say, observational reality, or, it's not. I think a great example of that is The Traders, where
Love The
it's like,
Traders.
really, you're putting like X number of people in a house and they have to do what? And there's gamesmanship, etc. But it's just about amazing execution and a format that holds up. That's pretty generic. But I do think that anything is ripe for reinvention. I think there will always be room for a dating show. I think there will always be room for a competition, a physical competition show. I think the game genre is incredible, and there's always room for reinvention in the game reality mashup. The business of reality is like the business of anything. It costs more and more to make things season after season. I think you have to balance just the actual reality of what it takes to make movies and television, digital content and podcast content. And, you can imagine yourselves, maybe not, running a podcast company with, 200 employees who are pumping out, instead of one show a week, you're pumping out 40, 50 shows a week. Your ethos and your structure would have to change, and it would go through rocky periods, and then you'd figure it out. And I think that's where movies went through a rocky period 100 years ago. Scripted TV went through a rocky period with the rise of cable, and reality is figuring itself out.
Well, that's a huge relief and reassurance to think that it's probably not going anywhere soon, because I literally don't know what we would do.
I don't know what I would
Absolutely.
crumble into the sea. Well, I would just, I have my accounting job, but it's not as much fun as
Exactly.
this one.
Right. That's right. Yep.
Speaking of highbrow, we love and highly recommend your Substack, LZ Sunday Papers. What inspired you to start writing like blogs and essays and linking interesting articles, other than your very interesting perspective and incredible work ethic?
Well, the LZ Sunday paper comes out every Sunday morning. It has for 10 years, every Sunday morning, which makes my Friday and Saturday increasingly, distractingly, maybe annoyingly busy. And really, I tried to make it not about the blog post. What it is a compendium of the week's news, from politics to relationships to business to pop culture to health to sports to obituaries. All the news of the week by, about, and for a women's perspective. And it's really popular, and I have a really engaged audience, and I love doing it. What inspired me was just a lifetime of trying to understand women's place in the world, my place in the world. And it grew out of a very small email group of actually work peers and friends. And when I left NBCUniversal, I was able to expand it, and be a little looser about it. The book that just came out is a total U-turn. It's been also almost 10 years in the making. It's a book of letters, resignation letters from the trustees and fellows of Brown University, which sounds really boring. But all I can tell you is that it, especially in today's campus climate, which is really rocky for the students and for the grown-ups, it speaks directly to why the voices of students are important, and why, when those voices are 10, 20, 30, 40 years older than the undergraduate age, there's still tremendous connections to be made about shared experience that I hope bridges gaps between the us's and the them's in all dimensions. So Letters is available on Amazon if you Google my name.
Yes, and even though at first I too was daunted by the title, because it does sound very highbrow, like Graydon Carter has already said it's a fascinating book and it's very accessible. Kirkus Reviews calls it a goldmine. So even students like us who are scared of
not Ivy
reading being
Leaguers.
hard, yeah,
I went to a
dropped
state
out.
school.
Good for you. Everyone should, by the way. I mean, we need great state schools. Well, thank you. It really is also beautiful, but most of all, I hope even reading the first letter will prove, so to speak, that the thesis is real. It is a connection between generations past and today on campus.
Yeah, and what a
And
great.
even if you don't know what a letter is, some people might not know what it is anymore.
That's true. Think of it as an old-fashioned text. Like even before email, it's like this thing where you had a paper which came from trees, etc. So, just kind of fantasy sci-fi world of paper and writing things with a pen.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. What a great place to leave off to, because it's like, your career has been so much inspired by like your respect and history for the past and how it helps you predict and understand the audiences and the art of the present and future. And so does this book. So if any of that interests you, get Lauren's book. Thank you so much for coming
Thank you
today.
so much
We
for coming.
appreciate You're so generous with your time. We
Yes.
appreciate it.
You're so welcome. I appreciate it too. Fun time.
It was
Yes,
so great.
thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.